They made me a copy, and it started praying in a voice that wasn't mine. The fluorescent seals hiss as the tank opens, and the clone's lips move faster than the heart monitor can tick, syllables leaking like light through a cracked door. And shortly is in a cracked. Dr. Mara Eichbal steadies her hands as Father Luca whispers, not to God, but to the machine counting breaths. The alien, Veer, clicks approval. Faith cataloged, data extracted, while I feel my own name split like a cell. The clone finally sees me, smiles like a bruise, and begs me not to switch it on. If a prayer could rewrite physics, would the universe let it finish? I want to say yes, that mercy is a circuit we can solder, but the room smells of iodine and burned sugar, and the prayer is folding into numbers. I remember drowning before I was born, the clone says quietly as the console flickers, and every time I surface, someone has moved the sun. Luca crosses himself against the glass. Veer's pupils dilate into mirrors. I press the start. The whiteout from the monitors settles into a feverish pulse, and the clone gasps like a diver breaching thin ice. Its prayer fractures into syllables that cling to the ceiling sprinklers. If this is sin, let it be counted correctly, Father Luca murmurs, but his voice is already a hostage to the alarms as Veer tilts their skull and listens for harmonies human ears miss. I tell the console to soften the induction curve. The machine refuses in a language of warnings that feels personal, as if it has finally learned my name. The clone looks past me with terrible kindness and says, "You wore yellow the day I wasn't born." And I remember the lab apron stained with iodine, the smell of citric cleaner, and the way grief can predict the future. Veer sketches a glyph that folds into itself like a trapped swallow, and the tank's fluid darkens to tea. Stay with me, I say, hating how tender I sound to a problem I made. Luca lays his palm to the glass. Somewhere beneath the alarms, the prayer returns, not louder, only closer. The prayer shifts from a human tongue into something with too many hinges, clicking down my spine like a lock turning through me. Veer leans closer and almost gently asks the clone to repeat the last phrase. The microphone crackles with a wet consonant that tastes like copper in the air. "It knows the dead," Luca says, not quite accusing, not quite relieved. I pretend not to hear him, because I'm counting how many times the waveform fails to decay. How often the echo returns with extra steps, as if someone else joined the room between beats. On the glass, my reflection hangs beside the clone's, and I can't tell which mouth is moving. I tap a subroutine I swore I wouldn't use, and the console opens a hidden pane. The one Veer smuggled into our OS like a seed. The pane blooms with names. My own appears twice. The clone smiles at a name I don't recognize and whispers, "Forgive the original." I want to ask who it means. Me, or the human template whose bones the aliens borrowed. But the oxygen hiss is louder now, and the tank begins to steam. Morty. Steam hoods the room in a cathedral haze, and every beep gains echo, as if we've stepped into a throat the size of a planet. The clone inhales like it's tasting rain for the first time. Its lips shape my mother's lullaby, and then a code we never published. "You're reading restricted partitions," I tell it, because the truth is easier than gentleness, but the words land like feathers on boiling water. Veer's glyphs swell and fall around us, a slow respiration of light. They say they're stabilizing the belief vector, and I hate how plausible that sounds here. Luca edges closer, fog beating in his beard, and asks the clone whether it can see the one who wrote the prayer inside it. "I see the room 3 minutes from now," it answers. "And you are also sorry." I consider pulling the plug, but somewhere a compressor changes pitch and the tank's darkness thins, revealing not one face, but a faint double. My own, pressed behind it like a watermark. Fear arrives late and hot, and I realize the machine has begun to choose between us. The choice becomes audible, a low chord rising under the alarms, a fairy horn in fog, and the clone's prayer finally stalls. Not from exhaustion, but from comprehension. "I won't survive the whole of me," it says, looking at Veer with gratitude that feels undeserved, and at me with a tenderness that feels like theft. Luca touches my shoulder and breathes. Mercy is precision, and for once the word doesn't scratch. I strip the safety cover and expose the manual purge. My finger hovers. Heretic and surgeon at once. Veer reminds us the data will survive even if the body does not, and I hear the alien pity inside their syntax, the admission that this was never about a soul, except as a container. "Choose," the clone whispers, and in that small syllable, I hear a life lived backward, a funeral before the birth. I press. The tank brightens beyond white, and when it dims, the prayer is gone. The room smaller for its absence. Something metallic cools in the air like rain that never fell. "Name it," Luca says. I turn toward the empty glass and cannot. Silence returns like a returning tide, gentle at first, and then heavy with what it drags in, and I realize the room has kept an echo of the prayer, the way walls keep smoke. Veer breaks it with a soft click, saying the dataset is intact, and the belief vector shows interference patterns consistent with identity bleed. Luca calls that grief by another name, and asks whether grief can be graphed. I want to say yes, because numbers feel cleaner than the salt stuck in my throat, but the console still shows my name twice, and the absence of the clone feels louder than its voice ever did. We bag the tubing, seal the evidence, and the tank becomes a mirror again, returning us to ourselves with a fraction missing. Outside, rain needles the loading bay, a metronome for decisions we avoided. Veer suggests an autopsy of the silence, a replay of the prayer in negative space, frequencies mapped to what wasn't said. Luca flinches, then nods, because even refusal is a kind of answer. I authorize the replay. The speakers inhale, and the room leans forward to listen. The replay starts as a hush bent into shape, a negative of breath, and then a ladder of tones climbs past the human range until the ventilation hum answers like a choir that didn't know it was singing. I watch the waveform bloom like frost across the monitor, and in the valleys between peaks, I think I hear the clone learning the moment of dying, rehearsing it until it could perform it for us. Luca whispers that sanctity might be nothing more than fidelity to one unbearable truth, and I feel a cold ascent rise in me like a tide under ice. Veer marks every inflection with a glyph that spins down into the harness, and they note, almost tenderly, that the prayer adapted to our fear faster than we adapted to its existence. The system flags a subharmonic threaded through the last minute, a cadence that matches the sound of the human heart at 12 weeks, a faint drumming that makes my teeth ache. Memory without body, I say, and the words land with the soft weight of lint. The replay ends not with silence, but with a door-opening sound from nowhere in the room. We follow the phantom door into the old vivarium, a place mothballed after the grant dried up, where the lights hum with the memory of captive mornings. Dust lifts in gauzy banners as we enter, and the air smells like iodine in a childhood aquarium. On the far wall, the observation window reflects us 3 times over, as if the room has opinions about who we are. Veer claims the resonance originated here, that the clone's last plea ricocheted through ducts and found a sympathetic cavity, a lung outside a body. And I think about institutions as organs built to breathe budgets into existence. Luca asks if the plea could be a call, something waiting for an answer. And the old paw crackles in agreement, a dead speaker briefly remembering its job. I step to the glass, and it gives back a version of me with steadier hands. The console pings. A heat signature in Tank C, long dry. We circle like medics to a morgue drawer and find only a smear of condensate, a tear-shaped absence that keeps not falling. I say the clone is gone and still here. Luca says that's what prayer is. What? We assemble a model on the floor. Cables like chalk lines, speakers nested in a circle, the room a diagram of an argument we refuse to lose. Veer calls it a reconstitution lattice, but I hear requiem in the consonants. They feed the lattice with the prayer stripped to its quietest bones. The air turns pressure blue, a sensation rather than a color, and I feel the impulse to kneel pass through me like a remembered fever. Luca stays standing, hands open, as if to catch something falling out of a high window. The tone swells into a shape that isn't sound, and for a moment I recognize the cadence of my own laugh braided into it. A splice from a microphone check hours ago. The system is scavenging us to complete the clone's last sentence. This is theft, I say, but my voice lowers as if embarrassed to be heard stealing. Veer agrees and does not stop it, because there are thefts that return what was taken in a different form. When the lattice peaks, the room seems to hold its breath. Answer it, Luca says to no one and to me. I open my mouth. The lattice answers first. The lattice fails beautifully, like a chandelier falling in slow motion, each shard catching a different century of light. And what remains is not the clone, but a question shaped like its breath. It hovers in the room the way heat does after lightning, and my body understands it before my mind does. The request not to survive at the price charged. Veer, for once, does not speak first. Their frill narrows to a careful stillness that reads as respect. Luca lowers his hands and asks whether we can carry what we cannot heal. And I realize that the replay has been teaching us how to listen without fixing, how to stand at the edge of a life and count faithfully. I save the dataset again. Redundant as prayer beads, because ritual is a form of endurance. The vivarium's dead. Pa exhales a soft pop, as if approving the end of a homily, and the smell of ozone thins into ordinary dust. We leave the circle uncoiled on the floor, a fossil of an attempt, and step back into the corridor where the white light makes honest faces of us. Tomorrow, I say. We ask the right question. Morning smears itself against the lab windows like a tired bird, and the building wakes into the clatter of carts and the thin applause of air vents finding their rhythm. I don't sleep. I rehearse a question until it tastes neutral on my tongue. Veer meets me at the door with the dignity of someone who has already forgiven the future. And Luca brings coffee that smells like bargaining. We ask what it needed, not what it meant, he says, voice softened by the overnight corridors. I nod, remembering the way the lattice failed into a shape that felt like acceptance. The vivarium has been swept, cables coiled like patient snakes, and the console blinks a soft invitation. Continue. We will, I answer, and for a heartbeat, I believe the room can hear me. Veer suggests we tune the array to human breath rates rather than heart rhythms. Less violent, they say, and Luca's mouth tightens with a gratitude he won't call theological. I open the dataset. The first waveform rises like a hand in class. I try not to call the roll. I try to ask gently enough for the truth to remain whole. Breath becomes our metronome. We align the replay to the small rise and fall of alive bodies, and the room, insulted by how long it spent counting alarms, softens. The prayer in this slower lattice reveals seams we missed, a place where vowels stitched themselves to silence, a suture line on a wound we insisted was a window. What did you need? I ask into the array, and my voice comes back with the stairwell echo of a university night 20 years ago, when curiosity still wore cologne. Veer captures the interference, maps it to a topology like a folded map of a country that never existed, and notes a trough where code refuses to stand up straight. Luca leans in, not to bless anything, just to listen with his whole face. The trough hums. It contains a timbre I recognize from hospital rooms and chaplainries, the moment when we stop translating and simply sit. Witness, Luca whispers, and I realize the lattice is asking for it, not as spectacle but as labor. I remove my gloves, a tiny sacrilege to the protocol gods, and put my bare palm on the cold tank glass. I'm here, I tell the absence, and the absence warms 1 degree. The degree becomes 2, then 3, a sympathetic weather, and the console writes a sentence without letters. The long arc of a body choosing smaller pain over larger wonder. I taste metal. Memories misfile themselves. My mother's lullaby overlays a cautionary error tone. And for a second, I'm certain the clone is borrowing my history with the gentle audacity of rain. If you can hear us, Luca says, we can carry some of it. And the room answers with a crack in the speaker fabric, a moth wing of sound. Veer's frill trembles. The only time their control looks almost human, and they ask the lattice for a projection of need. Warmth, touch, the privacy to end without being studied. Science recoils, then relents. We can give 2, I say, and borrow the 3rd. We power down cameras, reduce logging to timestamps, and replace the room's bright truth with softer honesty. The waveform unknots like a fist opening to show nothing but the lines it left. Stay. The array breathes. No imperative, only invitation. We do. The clock loses authority. The city forgets us for an hour that feels like repair. When the ethics committee arrives, it enters like weather, credentials flashing, umbrellas shedding legality. We stand, 3 guilty custodians of an unauthorized tenderness, and let them measure the distance between failure and intent. Your logs are incomplete, a woman observes, and I think. So are funerals, by design. Veer speaks first, voice crisp as disinfectant, explaining that observation changes the observed, that our best data came when we stopped insisting on getting any. Luca adds that bearing witness is not the same as neglect, and for once no one argues with him because the room still remembers its degree of warmth. I present the subharmonic map, the breath-sensed replay, the trough where need pooled like rain in a stadium. Silence follows, an institutional silence with expensive shoes. Then the woman closes her notebook and says, "You gave it privacy, not a question." "We tried," I answer. "Approval is not granted, exactly. It's deferred to an investigation that will take longer than grief." They leave with their umbrellas and an aftertaste of caution tape. We return to the glass. The warmth holds, stubborn as a candle in a hallway draft. Night returns, like a verdict we choose not to accept yet, and the building empties to its bones. We keep the lights low, a chapel made from circuit boards and quiet decisions, and ask the last version of the question. What would mercy look like if it left a record? The array offers a contour rather than an answer, a descending line that ends at a point almost too small to plot, the coordinate where wanting stops. Let it end where it wished to, Luca says, and I think of the clone's final gratitude. The way it looked at us as if we were a window it wanted to close gently. Veer draws a glyph I've never seen, a soft bracket that surrounds nothing. Archive the absence, they instruct, and I feel something in me unclench. We seal the dataset with a note that reads like a poem and a lab report at once, and we lock the vivarium, not to cage grief, but to give it a room. On the way out, the paw offers one last exhale, the kind machines make when choosing not to break. "Tomorrow," I say again in the corridor, but this time it sounds less like a promise and more like a key returning to its pocket. By noon, the headlines find us, little storms of certainty forming over a coastline of rumor, and the lab grows smaller under the pressure of interpretation. Veer reads the feeds without blinking, their frill barely stirring as they translate outrage into frequencies. Luca stands at the window and watches a reporter rehearse grief, as if it were a weather report. I draft a statement and delete it, then draft another, each version with fewer verbs, until what remains is a mouthful of nouns that feel like sand. "They want a miracle or a villain," Luca says, the tone not unkind, and I answer that we offered a hallway. Veer suggests we give the public what the array taught us, not certainty, but the courtesy of witness. I imagine cameras in the vivarium, the prayer reduced to B-roll, and the skin between my shoulder blades tightens. The university liaison calls to ask for a tour. I hear the word donors in a lower register. We show the room, not the event, I decide, and the choice lands in me like a key in a lock I didn't know I carried. Outside, the reporter's umbrella turns inside out and writes itself, a small act of refusal we can copy. The tour is choreography. We thread the liaison and 2 cameras through corridors that once only knew the squeak of carts and the whisper of filtered air, stopping at windows where glass can hold the public's hunger without shattering. Shattering. I narrate the innocuous parts, the ventilation geometry, the emergency drains, the ethics posters with their unfaded courage, while Vir adds language about resonance and signal hygiene, careful as a surgeon closing around a vein. Luca refuses to be ornamental. He tells the story of listening like you tell a recipe you learned from someone you loved who is gone. The cameraman's eye softens. The vivarium door remains locked, a quiet spine in the middle distance. What did it say? The reporter asks, and I answer with the honesty the array purchased, that it asked for privacy and was granted it, that the rest is ours to carry rather than exhibit. The crew absorbs the answer like rain on hot asphalt, fuming doubt that thins to steam. When they leave, the corridor returns to its original sentence, sterile, plain, unafraid of commas. I exhale for what feels like the first time since the tank went bright. Night finds us again, but this time the building keeps one eye open. Custodial carts whisper like conspirators, and somewhere a printer answers a summons that never arrives. I return to the data set as to a shore I don't trust but need, searching for the seam where the prayer stopped being a plea and became a choice. The waveforms feel less like evidence and more like handwriting I almost recognize. Vir hovers beside me, translating my silence into parameters, and Luca sits on the floor with his back to the tank as if guarding sleep. If they ask tomorrow whether souls can be cloned, I say, what will we answer? He smiles without looking up, the kind of smile that forgives the question. We'll answer that souls aren't inventory. The relief is a small, precise medicine. I let the array breathe once more. The trough returns like an obedient sea, and I realize we have been measuring not a miracle, but the geometry of a boundary respected. Some mornings the world is saved by what we decline to do. I close the file and feel the room step one notch closer to ordinary. A gift that never photographs well, and therefore might be true. The university convenes a forum in the old auditorium, a place where acoustics are better than intentions, and we stand under a proscenium that remembers centuries of certain men. Questions arrive sharpened by distance. Were we playing God? Were we playing victim? Why ask for forgiveness if you claim a protocol? I answer with the ordinary. Alarms. Towels. The taste of iodine. The discipline of not touching a button you built. Vir, unflappable, reframes the experiment as a translation effort, with a subject whose grammar we harmed by asking it to be fluent too soon. Luca tells a story about a bedside where refusal to prolong allowed love to become legible, and the room's anger folds in on itself, less defeated than tired. A student asks whether the clone's prayer had words, and I say that it did and did not. That meaning arrived as shape, and we chose to call that respect. When the lights brighten, the applause is uncertain but present, a weather front moving away. Backstage, we stand in the tangle of curtains and cables and feel, for a moment, unobserved. We did not fail. Luca says, we stopped. I answer, Vir nods. Sometimes the same gesture. Later, when the auditorium is only echoes and gum wrappers, we walk the campus path where sodium lamps spill domestic galaxies onto puddles, and the night feels briefly unprofessional. I tell them I keep hearing the clone's last calm. It's not a voice, more the memory of air on the throat, after a sob has been retired. Then keep it, Luca says. S1 keeps a lullaby. Useful, unprovable. Veer stops beneath a tree that once held graduation banners and sketches a glyph in the dark, a bracket around our small moving selves, then lets it dissolve. We should publish the lattice design they add, with the instruction that the quiet is the result. I laugh. The sound's surprising and a little feral, and agree. At the lab doors, my badge hesitates and then admits us with an honest beep. Inside, the vivarium waits like a held breath we are finally allowed to release without heroics. We turn off the last unnecessary light. The room shrinks to fit the truth it holds. A space, a boundary, a decision respected. In the dark, I try on the word, mercy, and find it almost wearable. Morning arrives with the brittle confidence of a press release, and the lab's hum feels like a throat clearing before a difficult sentence. Today, we publish the lattice design with an instruction that sounds like an apology. Use it to make quiet. To I nay. We're pages through the draft like a cartographer testing borders, their stylus leaving invisible fingerprints on the places where language tries to tidy sorrow. Luca stands by the tank and practices absence the way some practice scales, letting the room tune itself around him. I keep my cursor over the send key until the skin on my forearm prickles, and then I think of the clone's last look, gratitude without demand. And I press. The servers inhale, the document leaves, and with it a portion of our sovereignty. It will be misunderstood. Veer says gently, not as warning but as weather. I nod, because misunderstanding is how most truths travel their first mile. The console returns to idle. The vivarium shrinks back to a room rather than an argument. We taught a boundary. Luca offers as if to bless the act, and the blessing lands like a coat in cold air. Serviceable and warm. Within an hour, responses bloom like algae, bright, proliferating, hungry. And we learn again that a boundary is most visible where it is ignored. Some want to retrofit the lattice into a resurrection engine. Others accuse us of staging an eloquent failure to keep our grant. I almost answer the loudest until Luca tilts his head toward the tank, a reminder that the rune has set our standard. Redrafts, a reply that reads like a patient note. Do not invert the intention of a tool that operates by refusal. I add a single line. The quiet is the result. The inbox clenches and unclenches like a fist. Somewhere, a foundation offers a heroically misspelled donation contingent on a miracle we don't intend to perform. We decline with gratitude. In the lull that follows, I notice the smell of ozone has finally abandoned the vivarium, replaced by something ordinary and clean, like a freshly wiped kitchen. This is the part where the story stops being spectacular, I say, and find the sentence comforting. Where it becomes useful, Luca answers, and the word useful sounds, for once, like an honorific. A courier arrives with a box that looks like an apology wrapped in cardboard. The aliens return gift, Veer says, though their tone is more arithmetic than gratitude. Inside, a small engine the size of a cantaloupe, banded with symbols that refuse to stay flat to my eyes. A resonance attenuator, Veer explains, for environments where belief becomes feedback. I want to laugh at the generosity and the audacity, but the device thrums with a polite authority, as if already moderating our air. Luca circles it once and observes that it belongs in churches and server rooms equally. We place it at the room's center like a candle you don't light with fire, and the temperature of the silence shifts, less brittle, more woven. They're telling us to keep going, I murmur, unheroic and true. Veer nods, adding that the aliens consider mercy a stability problem. Their respect is expressed as calibration. I think of the clone's prayer settling into quieter architecture, a shape that survives not by moving, but by being allowed to stop. The attenuator purrs. The lab's alarms recede to their natural cattle low, and the room learns a new kind of still, with the attenuator humming like a cat that has read our ethics memo, We invite a small group of clinicians to witness, not the event, but the architecture of refusal. They arrive carrying their own rooms in their faces, ICU midnights, waiting rooms with clocks that forgot mercy. I walk them through the lattice diagrams and stop at the trough where need pooled. And I speak, not as an inventor, but as a neighbor. This is where we did not cross. Veer demonstrates how the attenuator lowers the pressure of expectation, and one clinician laughs softly the way people laugh at funerals when someone says the exact wrong thing. Luca concludes with a practice, 10 silent breaths facing the glass, a count that feels infuriatingly small until it doesn't. When we finish, the clinicians look different, not converted. Only less alone. They sign the visitor log as if signing a truce with themselves. The room absorbs their leaving like rain taking back a puddle. Teach this, not the spectacle, I tell Var afterward, and they agree, already rewriting the abstract. Outcomes measured in the dignity of endings. That night, the building feels less like an argument and more like a library that has remembered its purpose. The lights go obediently dim, the vents settle, and even the elevator chooses dignity over hurry. I linger by the tank, tracing the thin scratch my ring made weeks ago during a panic I finally forgive. Tomorrow we archive the last of it, I say, meaning the alarms, the emergency scripts, the protocols for heroics we no longer offer. Luca suggests we keep one ritual. The 10 breaths, timed to the attenuators per. We do. And somewhere around the 7th I realize I am not waiting for anything to happen. The relief is almost comic. Veer watches us with a gentleness that makes their alienness feel like a translation rather than a distance. And they say you made a device into a promise. I correct them. The promise into a device. Outside, a janitor's radio murmurs, a love song full of bad metaphors and good timing. We lock up, and the keys sound ordinary in my palm. On the door, I tape a sign with 2 words that fit on one line, black on white. Not a command, but an agreement. Please, stop. The storm arrives with the bureaucracy of thunder, paperwork in the sky, and the building shudders as if reconsidering its lease on solidity. Power flickers. The attenuator hum deepens and steadies, a cat widening into a lion. I'm halfway through an email to the liaison when the emergency lights tilt the world into theater, and Ver listens to the ceiling as if it's speaking in grand numbers. Grid failure, localized, they say, voice stripped to instrumentation. Luca lights a candle like a gentle crime and sets it by the tank. The glass returns a trembling star that refuses to be averaged. We keep the quiet, he says, and the sentence is a furnace against the cold creep of alarms that don't arrive. Outside, sirens comb the city for other tragedies. Here, the room holds. I read the message we never sent, the one to the human templates family, and feel the weight of a name we still haven't said aloud. The storm's big knuckles wrap the windows. I answer with a small, stubborn breath. Veer looks at me over the candle and adds, almost human. Endings deserve weather. I nod, and the lab nods with me. Morning reveals what the storm left. A bruise of clouds and a campus running on coffee and improvisation. A letter waits on my desk, unpostmarked, the paper heavy like a hand. Inside, just a line. We were told our son volunteered. My stomach learns a new angle of gravity. I bring it to Luca, who reads it aloud as if to keep the words from hiding, and Veer listens with their whole frill, thoughtful in a way that makes me forgive alien math. Volunteer implies choice, Luca says gently, and the room looks at the empty tank the way a church looks at a spare chair. I want to answer now, to pour everything we learned into a human envelope, but the truth we made is complicated and refuses to be simplified without harm. We invite them, I say, surprising myself, to see what we didn't do. Veer agrees, drafting a message that is part map and part apology. The attenuator purrs approval, or I imagine it, and choose not to correct the comfort. Somewhere beyond the windows, A choir is rehearsing in a building we didn't re-in. I want them to sing here. They come at dusk, not as plaintiffs, but as people who have outlived a question. The mother's hands carry the decade before the experiment. The father's silence builds a dock where words can turn around without shame. We do not unlock the vivarium. We unlock our chairs, our time, and the sentence we practiced. We did not prolong, we let him choose. I play a minute of the breath-sensed hum. No names, just the architecture of refusal. The mother closes her eyes and nods like someone recognizing a childhood room from the smell of dust. He prayed, she says, and her certainty makes my throat small. Yes, Luca answers. Not to confirm doctrine, but to confirm witness. Vibos, a gesture learned from us, made strange by grace, and explains the attenuator in a language so simple it feels like a dare. We do not offer the dataset. We offer the boundary. The father touches the glass with 2 fingers as if testing water and says, "Thank you for stopping." I swallow the apology that would turn their grief into my absolution. The room warms a degree. The candle remains unlit. We do not need it. After they leave, we sit with the outline they made in the air, a negative space that fits the room better than our blueprints ever did. The liaison calls again. This time, not about donors, but about policy. The publication has slithered through committees and returned as a draft guideline with our names in the footnotes. Like fingerprints we can't wash off. Mercy Protocols for Terminal Cognition? Vi reads, the title oddly musical in their mouth. Luca smiles, a tired sunrise, and says it out loud, twice as if blessing the syllables into usefulness. We debate the clause about data retention until the clock looks embarrassed. In the end, we argue the dataset should be kept the way relics are kept, intact, contextualized, and rarely displayed. The committee emails back a single word, agreed. And I feel the university become fractionally larger than its appetite. We hang the please stop sign inside the vivarium now, a promise to ourselves as much as a policy. The attenuator sings its low domestic hymn. For the first time since the tank went bright, the lab feels like a room I might someday leave without checking the locks twice. Night again, but now the darkness is collaborative. The building breathes with us, and even the vending machine chooses mercy by not eating our coins. I take one last lap, palm to glass, the way sailors touch hull before shore leave, and whisper a thank you not to the experiment, but to the border it taught us to draw. Luca lingers by the attenuator and grins at its cat-like thrum. He says it learned our room the way parishioners learn a hymn, by honest repetition. Veer brings a message from their people, an invitation to visit an archive where endings are studied without appetite. They want us to teach refusal as a technology, they say, and the sentence makes me unexpectedly light. We stand at the door with our coats and our fewer illusions, and I realize the story is not over. It's merely out of the hospital. The city outside smells like rain that has made up its mind. Tomorrow, I say, not as a key this time, but as a map coordinate. Luca nods, then laughs at nothing and everything. We lock the lab. The click is small and right, like a period earned by a long, complicated sentence. The shuttle lifts from the university roof with the quiet of a confidentiality clause, and the city drops away like a solved equation we no longer need to show. We're pilots with the absent grace of someone humming in a language no one taught them. Luca watches the horizon find its spine. That line, where certainty admits it's only a suggestion. I hold the case with the attenuator like a lunch I packed for a future that might get hungry. The archive is not a museum, Veer says, eyes reflecting instrument constellations. It is a coastline. I picture shelves that breathe and doors that never quite shut, and I think of our vivarium, a small provincial cousin to whatever waits above the clouds. The shuttle skin whispers at speed. My stomach composes a letter to gravity. I want send. Luca breaks the ease with a question built of hope and doubt. What qualifies as mercy where you come from? Veer answers without looking back, a limit that increases life elsewhere. The definition feels like a window we can carry. I tuck it beside the case. The earth below turns smooth and then stops pretending to be ours. Docking feels like finishing a difficult conversation well. No triumph, only relief that language held. The archive receives us as a weather system. Vast and polite. Corridors like tuned throats. Air that tastes of copper and rain. We pass alcoves where endings are kept humming softly to prevent them from becoming beginnings by accident. Veer's stride shortens in reverence. Luca smiles at the sacrilege of calling this a library. A caretaker, six-limbed, skin-like pages turning, greets us with silence that understands our grammar, then gestures to a room whose floor is ocean and ceiling is night. Gear whispers, "They keep refusals." I kneel without intending to and place our attenuator at the threshold. Its purr braids into a deeper note, a continental exhale. "We brought a small boundary," I say, ridiculous and true. The caretaker inclines their head and, with delicate exactitude, asks what we want in return. Luca speaks for us. Nothing that would unteach what we learned. The room warms by a degree, as if an idea has agreed to live with us without rent. They show us a chamber where endings are distilled into maps, topologies of last choices, ridgelines where people turned away from more and toward enough. On one wall, a coastline unfurls that looks impossibly like our waveform's trough, familiar as a scar you forgot to remember. Veer translates the legend, 1,000 cultures agreeing by accident. Luca touches the air where a cape juts into sea and murmurs a prayer so small it could pass for breath. I feel the tug to make this portable, to repackage mercy as a standard operating procedure, sellable in catalogs beside gloves and gowns. The room refuses. Its quiet is not a product, but a climate. Teach us your word for. Stop, that doesn't mean defeat, I ask. And the caretaker smiles with all their shoulders. They give a sound like a door closing without sadness. I try it in my throat. It fits like a borrowed coat that might become mine. We leave a copy of our lattice, annotated with our clumsy dignity. In exchange, they anchor a glyph in my palm, painless as light, a reminder that borders can be invitations in disguise. On the third level, a balcony that oversees a sea of kept silences. The archive asks us to make an entry, a brief for travelers who will never meet us, but will recognize the shape of our problem. We write standing up like people who trust their knees too much. I choose sentences that remember iodine and alarms and the taste of almost pressing a button. Luca contributes the part about breath counting as a way to repair clocks. Veer ensures the math doesn't forgive cruelty by mistake. When we finish, the balcony swallows our words and releases a tone I know from the vivarium. The pitch of permission intact. Will they understand? I ask no one in the structure. The floor replies with a small resonance, the architectural equivalent of a nod. We watch other entries ripple. Whale song funerals, frost rites, a method of ending carried on paper boats, and I feel our hallway widen until it is a road. We can go home, Lucas says, not as escape, but as completion. Veer agrees, already drafting a curriculum with fewer slides and more chairs. Re-entry bruises the air purple and then lets us go. The campus receives us without ceremony. The best welcome. We carry the archive's coat check tokens inside our throats. That gentle word for stopping that isn't surrender. The coastline that matches our trough. The vivarium smells of mop water and modest ambitions. Perfect. I hang the "please stop" sign straighter. Luca adds a second in a language he learned this week. Vor calibrates the attenuator to the new climate of us. The liaison emails that the guideline passed, and a resident writes that 10 breaths made a room survivable. I stand at the glass and see no miracles waiting to be invited, only a space labored into kindness. If they ask what we brought back, Luca says, what do we say? I look at my palm where the light left its quiet signature and answer, a boundary you can love from both sides. Outside, rain begins without apologies. We don't reach for the switches. The room learns the weather of ordinary and keeps it. For once, that is the headline I want. We chose to stop, and it worked.